I will get started on the content. Okay, so firstly about me and my role at PBS. So I am a proficient behaviour support practitioner. Before my time at Insight, I was volunteering at organisations providing phone and online support for people living with anxiety disorders. I then worked as a behaviour therapist for children aged 2 to 4 years old diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. I was supporting them in the implementation of strategies in both the home and the school environments. This then led me to joining Insight about 3 years ago now, where I've developed extensive experience working as a positive behaviour support practitioner. In my current role at Insight, I work with participants of all ages with a variety of different backgrounds and diagnoses. But given my background in working in intervention and working with young kids, I have a special interest in working with some of our younger participants and their families. I particularly enjoy working with care teams and other allied health professionals, including speech pathologists and occupational therapists, to develop and implement communication strategies, including written and visual communication resources for some of our non-verbal or non-speaking participants. In terms of my future goals within the PBS space, I'm working towards my advanced level of proficiency. Hopefully I'll then work towards my specialist proficiency level following that. And I aim to continue to work with a variety of different care teams in a variety of different environments. Something I wanted to flag before we get into the content of today's presentation is that I live and work in Victoria. So my experience as a BSP is through working in Victoria and supporting participants in Victoria. I know that some of the processes and legislations can vary between states in the NDIS, but hopefully today we're going to be covering a more general perspective of PBS. So hopefully this is all beneficial and interesting for those joining from different states. Okay, so what is PBS? So PBS is a person-centered approach that aims to understand, prevent, and reduce challenging behaviour through identifying and addressing the underlying causes and functions behind that behaviour. As PBS practitioners, we do this through understanding the behaviour, so identifying the reasons behind the behaviour and addressing underlying needs. We also aim to create supportive environments through modifying surroundings to promote positive behaviour and reduce triggers. One of the ways we as BSPs aim to create supportive environments is through reducing restrictive practices and prioritising dignity and choice. I'll touch on restrictive practices later on in the presentation. We also aim to provide training and upskilling for our support networks. So we provide ongoing training to families, support workers, and professionals to ensure that we're implementing effective strategies. And then collaboration. Implementing a collaborative approach is really key to PBS. We act as intervention coaches, so we guide and support teams to deliver consistent and person-centered support. And then finally, continuous monitoring and ongoing assessment and improvement. So as behaviour support practitioners, we use data and ongoing monitoring to refine strategies and ensure that we are bringing about effective and long-term change. Okay, so as BSPs or behaviour support practitioners, we work to ensure that we are aligning with the key principles of PBS. So that includes making sure that we are really working with an individualised approach. So we're ensuring that we're tailoring each behaviour support plan to the participant's specific disability, their strengths, potential challenges, communication style, as well as their preferences. And this ensures that we're creating genuinely effective plans whilst also respecting the autonomy of the individual. We also work to make sure that we are strengths-based. So we focus on building upon existing skills and strengths. We identify positive behaviours and capabilities, and we use them as a foundation for developing new strategies and coping mechanisms, thereby hoping to enhance self-esteem and fostering a sense of autonomy and independence in our participants. As I mentioned on the previous slide, positive behaviour support is a really collaborative approach. So when we're creating and implementing a positive behaviour support plan, we want to ensure that we're involving the participant themselves, but then their family, their support workers, and any other professionals that are key to their support. We aim to ensure open communication and sharing that aligns with the person's goals and values within the NDIS framework. And then finally, I touched on this on the previous slide as well, but we are data-driven. So we implement regular monitoring and observation of behaviours through behaviour charts, ABC data, progress reports, and these inform our plans and ensure that we're implementing effective and proactive intervention for all our participants. Okay, so as positive behaviour support practitioners, we're working to understand the function behind the behaviours that we see in our participants. So I thought we would briefly touch on some definitions and examples of potential risk of harm behaviours that we can see. Oh, sorry, just one moment. I think there is something. Sorry, there was an issue there with the sound, but hopefully that is all sorted for everyone. Okay, so risk of harm behaviours. Risk of harm behaviours refers to any behaviours that have the potential to cause physical, emotional, or psychological harm to the participant that we're supporting, but also those around them. So that includes their family, co-residents, support workers, as well as the wider community as well. When we talk about these behaviours, something I always like to highlight is that it is the behaviour itself that's causing the risk of harm or the challenge rather than the individual. So we as PBS practitioners see these behaviours as a form of communication, and we're trying to unpack what might be driving this behaviour. So if there's any unmet needs that are resulting in the risk of harm, we want to find other ways to meet that need. So some common risk of harm behaviours that we see as positive behaviour support practitioners include self-injury. So that could be head banging, biting, or scratching. We can also see aggression towards others. So that could be in the form of physical aggression, hitting, kicking, pushing, or in the form of verbal aggression, so swearing, shouting, or verbal threats as well. We can also see property destruction or property damage. That includes breaking objects, throwing items, or damaging the environment in any way. And then another common behaviour that we see is unsafe action. So that includes wandering behaviour or running away from caregivers, engaging in risky behaviours, or putting oneself in dangerous situations. So that may include drug or alcohol use and misuse. So as I already touched on, understanding the underlying cause of these behaviours is really key to our roles as BSPs. These behaviours could be influenced by communication difficulties. So if a person struggles to express themselves, they may resort to engagement in a behaviour as a form of communication. These behaviours may also be driven through sensory needs. So some individuals may engage in behaviours to seek or avoid certain sensory experiences. These behaviours may also come about due to environmental stresses. So changes in routine, overwhelming or really loud environments, for example, or lack of structure can increase a participant's distress as well, leading to engagement in those risk of harm behaviours. And then finally, underlying health conditions. So if a participant experiences pain or fatigue or any other untreated medical issue, this could significantly impact their behaviour as well, causing risk of harm behaviours. So by addressing the root causes of risk of harm behaviours and providing comprehensive support, we aim to create meaningful and lasting changes that improves the person's quality of life and keep everyone safe. So this may include conducting thorough assessments to understand triggers and identify strengths and needs. We use proactive strategies, so we want to proactively create environments that support positive behaviour rather than waiting for things to escalate and for the participant to engage in that risk of harm behaviour. We also want to empower our support networks, so ensure that families, carers and professionals have the skills and knowledge to provide the right support to their participant. And then we prioritise person-centred interventions, so we really centre the participant at the core of this process and focus on what works best for the individual rather than relying on restrictive or reactive approaches. Okay, so I thought I would briefly touch on the main roles of a behaviour support practitioner. Firstly, a definition of a behaviour support practitioner, or a BSP. BSPs are people who are considered suitable by the NDIS Commissioner to undertake behaviour support assessments and to develop behaviour support plans for NDIS participants. As a BSP, we aim to ensure the safety of our participants whilst also maintaining dignity and respect. So this includes identifying and working to reduce the use of restrictive practices, which I'll touch on the next slide, and where possible, eliminate these completely. We also work to reduce risk of harm behaviours to ensure the safety of not only our participant, but their support teams as well. So whilst we're aiming to ensure safety and reduce restrictive measures, we also want to improve the quality of life for our participants. So we do this through teaching new skills so that the participant and their care teams can cope with challenging situations and promote positive behaviour. Some skills that we may want to develop include social skills and coping strategies as well. We aim to improve quality of life through implementing a person-centred and values-driven approach, and also through providing positive reinforcement. So PBS really focuses on positive reinforcement to encourage positive behaviour rather than punishing or having consequences in place for the more challenging and problematic behaviour. Okay, so restrictive practices. As I noted on the previous slide, our main roles as BSPs is to ensure the safety and dignity of our participants. And this involves working with our teams to understand any restrictive practices that may be in place, as well as minimising the reliance on these restrictive practices. Our future presentations in this webinar series will cover restrictive practices in a bit more detail, but given that it's a key component of our work as behaviour support practitioners, I figured that we would touch on it a bit today as well. So firstly, a definition of restrictive practices. These are any interventions that limit a person's rights, freedoms, decision-making or movement in any way, and they should only ever be used as a last resort when there is immediate risk of harm. It's important to recognise that restrictive practices are often necessary in ensuring the safety of our participants as well as those supporting them. But we as BSPs really want to make sure that they are only used as a last resort and that other proactive strategies have been trialled before we implement a restrictive practice. So under the NDIS, there are 5 different restrictive practices, which I'll just go through in a little bit more detail. The first is seclusion. This includes the sole confinement of a person with a disability in a room or physical space at any time, where voluntary exit is prevented or not facilitated, or even if it's implied that voluntary exit is not permitted. So even if an individual may be able to leave a room or environment, if it's implied that they're not able to, then that is still considered seclusion. So some common examples of seclusion include locking doors, blocking exits, or isolating a person in any way that restricts their freedom of movement. So when we're working with participants in teams where seclusion may be in place, we focus on environmental adjustments and de-escalation techniques, as well as proactive strategies to support both the person and their stakeholders to ensure safety without removing them from social environments and settings. We then move on to chemical restraints. Now, chemical restraints are the use of medication or chemical substance for the primary purpose of influencing a person's behaviour. Now, obviously, medications are really important for medical needs and medical diagnoses, but we as BSPs just want to make sure that they're not being used as a substitute for proper behaviour support. So some common medications that may meet the requirements of a chemical restraint include those that sedate or suppress a person's ability to respond to their environment. Again, our role as BSPs is to ensure that behaviour is understood and supported in ways that do not rely on unnecessary medication, and that there is a clear plan for reducing reliance on chemical restraints where possible. The third restraint under the NDIS is physical restraint. So this is the use or action of physical force to prevent, restrict, or subdue movement of a person's body or a part of their body for the primary purpose of influencing their behaviour. This may include holding someone's arms down, restraining them to a chair, or using physical force to prevent movement. Understandably, physical restraints can carry serious risks of physical harm and injury, but also risks of trauma and potential loss of trust in their support teams. We then have mechanical restraints, which is the use of a device to prevent, restrict, or subdue a person's movement for the primary purpose of influencing a person's behaviour. So this could be things like straps, belts, splints, or restrictive clothing, for example, a helmet, that are designed to prevent a person from moving freely, and they're there to influence a person's behaviour. So while some mechanical devices may be needed for medical or safety reasons, for example, seatbelts in a wheelchair to ensure that our participant is sitting with the correct posture as diagnosed by an OT or a physio, it becomes a restrictive practice when it's used solely to control or influence the person's behaviour. And then finally, we have environmental restraints, which is the restriction of a person's free access to all parts of their environment, including items or activities. This includes limited access to the community or limited access to things in the home environment. For instance, a common one that I've come across is locked cupboards or locked drawers to prevent a participant from accessing things within those cupboards. Again, where these restraints are in place for the participants that we're supporting, we want to work with the care teams to develop and implement preventative strategies and de-escalation techniques to reduce the reliance on these restrictive practices. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, sometimes restrictive practices are necessary to ensure the safety of both our participants and their stakeholders. When this is the case, we want to ensure that they are being used ethically. So they must always be justified and properly documented. So any restrictive practice must be included in a behaviour support plan, and where required, the NDIS must be notified of this through using PROTA, which is the NDIS reporting system. Restrictive practices must be reviewed regularly. So as behaviour support practitioners, we don't see restrictive practices as indefinite solutions. They're things that are reviewed regularly and frequently. So our behaviour support plans are only valid for a set period of time of either 6 months or 12 months. So when this review period comes up, that's when we're going to discuss with our care teams and stakeholders whether the use of a restrictive practice is still required or whether we can begin the fade out process. And again, we only want to use restrictive practices as a last resort. So before implementing restrictive practices, we must ensure that all other proactive intervention strategies have been trialled. Understanding what has already been trialled by the support team helps us as BSPs identify new strategies to reduce or eliminate restrictive practices over time. Okay, so now that we've touched on some definitions of positive behaviour support, the role of BSPs, as well as how restrictive practices are monitored and reviewed by BSPs, let's unpack the PBS process a little bit more. So the process of positive behaviour support involves 4 phases. Those phases are the initial assessment and understanding phase, the development of the plan itself, the implementation and support to stakeholders, and then ongoing monitoring and review. So the initial assessment phase. In this phase, behaviour support practitioners assess the individual's behaviour and needs through interviews, observations, and reviews of their documents and support plans. So in this initial phase, we as practitioners will run through several questionnaires and assessments, as well as interviews with the participant, their stakeholders, and their care teams. We also may conduct some observation sessions as well. Some common questionnaires that we might want to run through with the participant and their teams include assessments of quality of life, some sensory screenings, some assessments relating to restrictive practices and whether there are any in place, and then also some assessments that try to unpack the underlying function behind the behaviours that we are addressing. We also complete an interview-style screening tool known as the biopsychosocial interview. And this covers areas including medical history and any relevant physical conditions, the emotional and mental health status of the participant, any important social connections, relationships and support systems, and then also any environmental or cultural influences. So this is the phase where the practitioner begins to develop an understanding about the function driving this individual's behaviour, and this is known as the functional behavioural assessment. As I mentioned earlier, we might also conduct some observations during this time. This may be in the home environment, the school environment, the day program even, just any environment where the participant spends a significant period of time or where we see these risk of harm behaviours. We then move on to the second phase of the PBS process, and this is the development of behaviour support plans. So this comprehensive document includes the information gathered in the assessment phase and outlines proactive strategies to address and reduce the risk of harm behaviours before they start. This may include skill building strategies to assist the participant develop alternative ways to meet their needs. So as I mentioned a few slides back, that could be coping strategies or communication skills. This plan may also recommend adjustments to the environment to make sure that the surroundings support the participant and encourage positive behaviour and the reduction of these risk of harm behaviours. This BSP will also include clear guidelines on restrictive practices if they are in place, and include a plan to minimise and eliminate these RPs over time. So as I've noted throughout the presentation, this is a really collaborative approach, and we want to ensure that the participant and all key members of their support team are involved in this process. There are 2 types of behaviour support plans that we as BSPs may develop. The first of which is an interim behaviour support plan, and that focuses on safety in the short term. Then there is a comprehensive behaviour support plan. So this is a bit longer, a bit more fleshed out, and this is developed once we have a solid understanding of what is driving that behaviour, as well as the participant, their background, and their team as well. So initially, when a BSP comes on board, they will develop an interim behaviour support plan addressing any immediate safety risks. And then in 6 months' time, they will develop that much longer, much more in-depth, comprehensive behaviour support plan. We then move into the third phase of the PBS process, and this is the implementation phase. So once the behaviour support plan has been developed with the team and the participant involved, we would then want to guide and support the team in implementing the strategies outlined in the plan. So this is really where we focus on providing the stakeholders with this training, the confidence and the skills to implement those recommendations. This is where I guess we can see that the behaviour support practitioner is acting like an intervention coach. So they're providing the support and the skills to the care team to ensure that they feel confident in implementing the strategies listed in the plan. So this implementation phase often includes training for the stakeholders. This may include psychoeducation about some of the participants' diagnoses and disabilities, as well as training on how to implement the strategies listed in the plan, and training on any restrictive practices that may be included in the plan. We will also be liaising with allied health professionals and practitioners to ensure that the strategies pertaining to their fields are also being implemented as well. This phase includes care team meetings where we will review how the behaviours of concern or risk of harm behaviours are evolving, whether they're increasing or decreasing or staying stable. And then we'll review why this might be the case. So does the team feel confident in implementing the strategies for successful outcomes? And then the final phase is the monitoring and review phase. So this is where a behaviour support practitioner regularly monitors the progress of the plan and evaluates how effective the strategies are. So this is where we review data collected by stakeholders and family members, and also identify any changes in behaviour trends. So this is where regular reviews and ongoing feedback from our stakeholders is particularly important. It's important throughout the entire process, but this is where we really want to ensure that we're seeing a reduction in those behaviours of concern. So we encourage our support teams to collect as much data as possible about the individual, whether that may be positive interaction or whether that is an incident of risk of harm behaviours. A common form of data collection that we use in positive behaviour support is ABC data. So that stands for antecedent, behaviour and consequence. So we're collecting information about what happened before the behaviour itself, and then what happened immediately after the behaviour. So we really want to encourage ongoing feedback and regular reviews in this phase. If the team feels that certain strategies may not be working effectively, that's when we're going to problem solve and address any barriers or challenges in that process with our teams. Okay, so those are the 4 main phases of the PBS process. Hopefully now when a behaviour support practitioner joins your care team, or when we're referring a participant to a behaviour support practitioner, hopefully now we have a greater understanding of what that process looks like, and also the steps that the behaviour support practitioner will be engaging in throughout those 4 phases. Okay. All right, I thought it would be really great if we could touch on some benefits of positive behaviour support. So PBS supports greater well-being through promoting a sense of safety, security and belonging for individuals with disability. PBS may also lead to reduced support needs. So by focusing on skill development and addressing the underlying causes and functions of behaviour, PBS may reduce the need for restrictive and reactive practices, as well as the need for long-term support as well. PBS may result in increased participation. So through supporting our participants to engage fully with their social network and communities, we see an increased likelihood that they're going to be engaged in meaningful activities that align with their values and goals. And finally, PBS works to improve quality of life for our participants. PBS can foster significant and meaningful change in an individual's quality of life by reducing instances of challenging behaviour, increasing positive interactions, and promoting independence and autonomy. This in turn reduces key carer burnout and stress experienced by our stakeholders and by the participants' care team, which in turn improves their quality of life as well. So before we move into some time for questions and feedback, just some key takeaways from today's presentation. So what is PBS? PBS is a person-centered approach that promotes positive behaviour through understanding, support, and skill development. It involves a collaborative approach with an integrated support system of family, professionals, and support workers to implement effective and long-lasting strategies. PBS uses evidence-based planning, so with structured behaviour supports based on assessment, implementation, and continuous monitoring. The focus is on human rights and dignity, and we aim to minimise and eventually eliminate restrictive practices through instead focusing on positive alternatives and preventative strategies. Okay, so that was the content that I wanted to cover today. Thank you so much for everyone's attention, and apologies that we ran into a few technical difficulties. We now have some time for questions and feedback, which I believe our team has been keeping an eye on in the chat. Jess, can you hear me? Is everything working on your front?
I can. Yes. Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, you're all up and running.
Look, excellent. Well, firstly, I should probably just introduce myself quickly. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name's Jess. I'm the clinical manager here at Insight. And I was meant to give you all a warm welcome at the very start to our Positive Pathway series, but of course ran into some pretty significant technical difficulties, and my camera and microphone weren't working. So thank you, Poppy, for being so flexible and just jumping in and getting the session going. Very much appreciated. And thank you for running such a great session, our very first session of the year. I have been monitoring the chat and I have answered a few questions as we went through. But if anyone does have any other questions, I've just popped in a little note there that if you do have questions, please pop them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them. If we don't get around to everybody's questions, we will, do our best to go away, answer them and send them via email. And just to confirm that everyone will get a recording of the session, a copy of the recording afterwards, hopefully in the next couple of days. So keep an eye out for that. I'm just keeping an eye on it now to see if any questions come through. What tools, oh, here we go. What tools would you recommend for data collection? That's a great question because it's such a huge part of what we do as practitioners. But I have to say it's definitely one of the most difficult things to collect. It's super useful for us to identify patterns in behaviour, so we can address specific areas where we can see we might be having more issues. So I would say it depends who the behaviour support practitioner is. Here at Insight, we have developed some very streamlined tools that we like to utilise specifically. We've created our own ABC data tools and forms to make it really easy for our stakeholders to fill out data and to give us some meaningful data that we can analyse and relay back to the team. We have different types. So there's the sort of ABC data, which is sort of more working out when the behaviours occurring, what behaviours are occurring, things like that. Ours includes, what sort of restrictive practices might be used, and trying to work out the antecedents, which is, for getting really technical, what's sort of happening just before the behaviour occurs, and what happened just after as well. And we also at Insight have engagement tracking data. So, when, for example, a behaviour isn't so overt, like it might not be an outburst behaviour like physical outbursts towards others. Sometimes it's that, retreating and not engaging. So we also have options to record engagement data as well, so that we can see if the person is engaging in meaningful activities and improving in those sorts of areas as well. But there are a plethora of tools out there that you can use. There are more manual ABC data tools and things like that. And we do try to be as flexible as possible when working with our stakeholders to, use what works best for them. So anything you'd add to that, Poppy? I hope I answered that okay.
No, I think that covers that question perfectly. I guess, as you mentioned, it is a challenging area, collecting data. We acknowledge that the teams that we're working with are often really busy, meeting the needs of the participant or multiple participants. So I think just being as flexible as possible and finding a data collection tool that really works for the team, whether that be just forwarding emails of any notable incidents to the practitioner, that sometimes works as well. But yeah, just any way of collecting that data. I've had participants in the past and their teams that just sort of have a notebook and write that down and send that to their practitioner at the end of the month, if that works best for the team as well. And yeah, we always
we'll take any
that.
data at the end of the day. We just want the data.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I can see quite a few more questions are entering the chat, which is great. So the next one is, what are some examples of FBAs? So the FBA is the functional behavioural assessment, and that's sort of an accumulation of multiple assessments. So that is, as Poppy said, the assessment phase. That kind of encompasses all the different assessments that we'll do in that phase, I suppose, of service. So that'll include, just as an example, things like the AQUAL, so the Assessment of Quality of Life, the HUDAS, disability assessment. We have a few behaviour specific, like the overt behaviour scale. We'll do a sensory assessment. And so that's sort of the accumulation of all of those assessments. If a practitioner feels that some additional assessments might be needed, we can look into that as well. And then that kind of makes up the FBA. So I hope that answers that question. And then essentially we'll write up an FBA report, which is the results of all of the assessments that we've done. A lot of the results are included in the behaviour support plan as well. But FBAs are required to upload to PRODA when a comprehensive BSP with restrictive practices has been written. So it'll always have an accompanying FBA as well. So I hope that answers that one. All right, the next one is, I'm currently studying and working in this field. What would be your suggestions for further study that would be of benefit? Great question. I think there are a few short courses out there. I know of one just off the top of my head, like I think Monash have like a short course that could be beneficial. Otherwise, yeah, keep checking the NDIS website or PD on this sort of thing. There's a lot of research going on at the moment and a lot of resources out there. Maybe we could find a few more and email them over to you afterwards. Thank you for that question, Angela. Our next question is, in regard to children, at what age would a BSP get involved? Another great question. It might be more related to the particular provider that you're working with, and it also is related to the type of funding that you have. So yeah, it's probably something, sometimes it's a case by case depending on the funding that you've got, but essentially it depends if you've got improved relationships funding. I am seeing children a bit younger these days coming through with improved relationships funding. Usually in the past few years, it's sort of been from the age of 7, but I am seeing a few come in a bit younger these days. So essentially, just to clarify, with behaviour support specifically, that comes under the Improved Relationships NDIS funding. And so whoever has that, we work across all age groups at the end of the day, across the lifespan. If you have that funding, we should be able to provide positive behaviour support services to you. All right, software-wise, perhaps. Oh, I think that was in relation to the data collection question. I'm not actually aware of specific software out there to record data. Yeah, as I was saying, we've sort of used our own sort of software and forms and whatnot to create our own tools. But maybe that's something someone could create down the track. Under what category is the PBS budgeted? Is PBS budgeted, and how to refer? How to see if participant has a budget to PBS practitioner, and what is the referral process? And just wondering, at what stage is the PBS plan developed? Does it happen after the participant has their NDIS plan developed? Yeah, okay, so a few questions in there that we can try to unpack. So as I said just before, you do have to have the Improved Relationships funding. What we sometimes do get, if there's alternative funding, is what we can support with a behaviour support assessment, which, to clarify, is not a behaviour support plan, but we could do a behaviour support assessment to do the initial sort of assessment phase and support in getting funding, in supporting you to get funding for improved relationships. So once you do have that, I would recommend talking to either your plan manager or your support coordinator, who can support in working out what is budgeted for positive behaviour support if you have that type of funding. In terms of the referral process, for us, it's super easy. You just pop onto our website and fill out the referral form, and then we can talk you through next steps once there's a referral in place. So we've just got a form on our website. And what stage the PBS plan is developed is, yes, as Poppy mentioned, so after the initial assessment and information gathering phase, that's when we develop a positive behaviour support plan. But yes, all the sort of NDIS background, NDIS plan and funding all has to be done prior to the referral, so that we can finalise your referral and start the PBS process. This is a great question. How long does the whole process take from beginning to end? Thoughts, Poppy, on that?
I guess it's almost like how long is a piece of string, in that it could take. It depends on the participant and who's in their care team. I guess when it comes to the development of a interim behaviour support plan, we like to try and get that written up in sort of 6 to 8 weeks from beginning to engage with the participant. And then obviously we'll implement the strategies on the interim, work with the team to monitor those and work through any challenges. And then 6 months after the interim is written, that's when we'll develop the comprehensive behaviour support plan. And that comprehensive behaviour support plan is then valid for a year. So that's how long, I guess, the plan development takes and how long each plan lasts. But in terms of how long between behaviour support coming on board and then maybe no longer needing behaviour support anymore, it really varies from participant to participant, how complex the situation is, how complex the environment is, and that sort of thing. Is there anything you'd add to that, Jess?
Yeah, no, I think that answers it really well. In terms of approx costs involved, I guess we often are looking at it in terms of hours, and then that'll correlate with the cost. But if we're looking at the number of hours, there's sort of various pathways that we kind of have here, depending on the package that you've got. So Usually, we'd say sort of the bare minimum for us to be able to produce a plan and do, some training would be at least 30 hours. I would say that's like sort of the bare minimum. We usually get a lot of plans starting from about 45 hours and then up to a total of 120 hours, because it can be really involved depending on the needs and how active the support needed will be. It can take a long time, so several hours. We've kind of got a cost breakdown that we can go through with you if you do have a referral, but anywhere from, for each phase could have up to 20 or so hours involved just per each phase, because there is a lot of involvement. There's a lot of communication involved. There's a lot of communication with all the various stakeholders, consulting with the participant, going back and writing the plan, developing strategies, keeping everybody up to date throughout that whole process, and creating and providing training as well for the various stakeholders involved. So yeah, as Poppy said, sort of how long is a piece of string, but and that's where I think sometimes it can be a bit tricky and confusing as to what behaviour support looks like, because it's not, I guess, a therapy-based model where you're necessarily seeing the participant very regularly for an appointment, every fortnight. It kind of has those different phases, and the level of involvement from the practitioner is definitely very high at the start. And then as we provide training and we get to that monitoring phase, we can sort of peel it back to where, you may be catching up for a care team meeting once a fortnight or once a month, and reviewing any barriers and things there. I hope that sort of answers your question. So if that wasn't super straightforward. All right, I think we have time for a few more. What happens when one needs to use an unauthorised restrictive practice? How does one go about reporting this to the Commission? Fantastic question. So if you are a provider, it's different to if you were a family implementing a restrictive practice. So just want to make that clear, because currently the NDIS aren't, I guess there's no obligations for family members to report using restrictive practices every time to the Commission. However, but they are of course still included in a behaviour support plan. However, if you're a provider, my understanding is that any restrictive practice that you used that is not currently authorised means that you do have to report it to the Commission. Whether that is through PRODA specifically or a different program may depend. That is a good question. Yeah, let me know, Poppy, if you have more experience with this. But as a provider, hopefully you're NDIS registered, and there will be ways that you communicate with the Commission about restrictive practices. It is a bit different from the behaviour support practitioner end. We don't have all the same programs that you will as a provider. And again, it's different in each state. So Poppy and I are Victoria based. So if you're in a different state, it'll be a different process. So I won't get into the specifics about it exactly now, but it is a great question. But you are obligated, to be clear, you are obligated to report that to the Commission. All right. All right. What is the next step if a BSP is overdue, if a practitioner is not answering or following up? So look, if there are issues with BSPs overdue, if there are ever any issues with practitioners, depending on the provider, if there was ever an issue like that at Insight, I would absolutely recommend escalating it to their team leader. In every allocation email, we have the team leader CC'd into it, so that there's always an easy point of escalation to raise that with, and we will go about addressing it straight away. So yes, obviously it depends on who the provider is, but we like to think that we've got some easy strategies in place to be able to escalate any issues or concerns. We also ensure that our practitioners are communicating very regularly with practitioners. We expect with stakeholders, and we expect that everybody is keeping their stakeholders up to date at least once a fortnight, at least to talk about their progress and any next steps. All right. I think that is, continue. If a BSP is overdue, do we continue with the past BSP and do we report as unauthorized? If a BSP is expired, so technically it's no longer in place, and you would have to go back to reporting as each RP until the new BSP is in place. I hope that answers that question. It would go back to being unauthorized, is my understanding. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much again for joining us. We've got our feedback link there on the page, and maybe Poppy, if you've got the link still, because I don't have mine anymore, we could pop that in the chat if that's easier for anyone. We'll pop that in the chat.
Let me just grab that one for everyone.
Excellent. Otherwise, we'll email it to you with.
Sorry, everyone. The link doesn't seem to be working. We'll include that in the email.
We will. All right. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We hope this was a beneficial session for you. We look forward to putting on more. I believe our next one is about RPs, and we look forward to you signing up and seeing you all then. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and thanks again. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.